Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. We're excited to announce that registration for our fall cohort of the Next Economy MBA is officially open. Beginning September 22nd, this 9-month facilitated learning journey was created for listeners like you, the entrepreneurs, artists, community leaders, and other folks on the front lines of the Next Economy movement. Based on our 15 years of experience working with over 350 different social enterprises, we'll explore the pitfalls of the business-as-usual economy and dive into key business principles from a regenerative and equity-centered lens, all while fostering the community and connection we need to stay resilient, inspired, and motivated in our movement to create a world that works for all of us. Interested in learning more? Join us for a free intro session where you can meet course facilitators and hear from our amazing alumni to determine if this course is a fit for you. Plus, save 20% on tuition when you register before August 3rd during our early bird sale. Get started at lifteconomy.com/MBA. Thanks for listening. And now on to the show.
Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bayuk, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Matt Biggar. Matt is a researcher, consultant, and former educator who has worked on place-based initiatives and collaboratives for over a decade. He is the author of the book Connected to Place: Regenerating Nature, Communities, and Local Economies Through Systems Change. His background includes teaching a sustainable economics course to high schoolers in Palo Alto, California, and earning a PhD where he conducted studies on personal transportation behavior. I'm excited to speak with Matt because of his systems change frameworks. And those frameworks intend to provide a practical and inspiring roadmap for dismantling corporate capitalism's hold on many of our daily lives and replacing it with systems that authentically regenerate nature, regenerate communities, and local economies. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here with you at Next Economy Now, and appreciate that introduction and summary, and looking forward to diving in.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we start by asking if you would be willing to tell us a bit about your background, your story. How did you get into the work that you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah, it's been a long trajectory. I'll try to highlight a few things. I feel my entire career has been focused on social change and sustainability in different forms. And there's been about 3 different phases to it. But just before I got into my career, I studied political economy in college, always interested in how society organizes itself, what is going on with our political and economic arrangements. And I started getting concerned about the environment from some initial coursework about this idea around climate change and other things that were happening. But it was very abstract to me. And then I had this amazing experience after college through an outdoor school called Knowles. And I spent 2.5 months pretty much immersed in nature. And that just really spoke to me. It changed the way I felt in my daily life, even where I knowing what was going on and knowing what was at stake with these beautiful ecosystems just made me want to kind of commit myself to trying to be part of the solutions, because I knew so much nature was and still is being lost. And so with that, I went into working with young people and teaching high school, as you mentioned, and I focused on economics and government. And this is back in the late 90s. I started a sustainable economics course working with a local nonprofit called the Center for Economic Conversion. And it was very meaningful in terms of just helping students, high school kids, mostly on their way to college, think about the world a little differently than the dominant narrative, which was so powerful. And then I got into school and district administration. I still stayed focused on how can I support sustainability in schools and connection to nature and community through school gardens, renewable energy workforce training, a whole bunch of different things. But it just became a smaller and smaller part of what I did. And so it was calling me to come back and be more present with how I can contribute to healing nature and healing our society. And so that led me into research. And that was the focus that I brought into that was, and how can we change human behavior to have less impact, to live more in balance? And that focus became transportation behavior, at least here in California, in many places, the largest contribution of the average person to emissions, climate emissions. And I did 3 qualitative research studies that explored what shapes people's decisions. And we'll talk more about that. And then through that, I really kind of gained this appreciation for how much we need to work together across organizations, across sectors, particularly government, nonprofits, businesses, to change the context for how we live so that the sustainable, more equitable choices were more default. And that's what I've been doing the last 10, 11 years, primarily as a consultant, but now as a speaker and writer. I really focus on place-based systems change and bringing folks, different stakeholders together. A lot of it is kind of focused on change in our transportation and streets, but also a lot with urban nature and climate resilience, a fair amount with our schools and environmental education, place-based education. And with the book that you mentioned that came out late last year, I'm starting to do a lot more talking and workshops and writing around place-based systems change and really enjoying those interactions. And I get so much out of every engagement and I'm excited about what people are doing as well.
It's a great trajectory. Thanks, Matt. And stepping back, when you did your graduate work and studied kind of personal transportation behavior, curious about the qualitative research and the research in general about what it might have revealed about the motivations behind why people maybe actually choose sustainable transportation, or maybe what it revealed about why they do not. And what was highlighted there about the importance, you mentioned the context. So the physical and cultural context around human behavior in general. What were some of the key learnings from your research?
Yeah, great. Now you captured the kind of the driving questions that arose from my research and then eventually became my dissertation. And I did 3 separate qualitative research studies here in the Bay Area, looking at how different folks commuted or got around in daily life and what was influencing them. And I came in with this hypothesis, an educator of 17 years and believing that we really have this great opportunity to help build awareness and concern about environment, about injustice, and that if we could do a better job of that, we could lead to changes in how people behave and specifically get around for transportation in the case of my studies. And it was pretty much dead wrong. Just the awareness concern had very little effect, it seemed, on people's transportation choices. I almost found the opposite. I remember talking to a few, I did interviews, focus groups. We were talking to some folks who were really concerned about climate change and just were completely not seeing that anything besides a car was an option for their travel. And this is, EVs were starting to come on the scene back then. It was about 10, 15 years ago. So we're mostly talking, gas-powered cars at that point. So it was interesting to find that. And then it was, okay, well, what is actually coming out of all these interviews and focus groups about what it is? And another thing it really wasn't as much too, which I was surprised, was price. We think a lot about people, what's the most economic choice? And one study in particular, I studied commuters to Stanford, and the Stanford offers like free transit. You get paid to not bring a car to campus, so the clean air cash that they provide. So there's all these incentives financially, and it still wasn't really explanatory in terms of why people would choose to get to there without a car. And so it had so much to do with that, as you alluded to, context, right? And so the whole idea of individual motivations kind of went out the window. I mean, there's still something there that we can talk about, and things get mediated in different ways. But it had so much to do with just really the physical and the socio-cultural conditions. And there's some obvious things there. I mean, we know that good infrastructure, whether it's transit or biking or some other mode, is necessary to make it relatively safe and easy. That if you have to do 2 different transit types and the connection is not seamless or it takes a lot of time, that's problematic. So those things kind of had to be there, and that was reiterated.
Let me just to make sure I'm tracking, but I think I am. So like on the one hand, for example, having a segregated bike lane that is protected from automobiles, privileged at intersections with automobiles or something like that, maybe even covered from elements, not like California or coastal California has a lot of weather, but that type of infrastructure, the physical safety and other characteristics. That would be one like factor that's part of the context, of physical context that would matter. And then you mentioned modal shifting. So if you have to take a bus to then get on a train, or a bus to a bike, and you have to attach your bike to the bus, and if it's clunky or not seamless and challenging or stressful, that's another physical contextual barrier. Is that you're saying?
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, all of those things for sure. And it all matters. It all adds up to making it possible or not. And to some extent, in like communities across, there's so much communities have been developed to be very car dependent, as we know, across the country. And so literally not even being an option for a lot of people. And I found in other studies that I did in like more suburban settings. I mean, where I grew up in suburban LA, I never experienced public transit. I hardly knew it existed. Right. Yeah. So that's like a foundational thing. But then you get into some more important nuance there that I really surfaced in these studies, that it does matter. Like if you can't get to the train station very easily without having, you can't walk there, let's say, being able to get your bike easily on a train, which is true, to a certain extent with Caltrain that we have here, makes a big difference. That made it possible for a lot of people. And then, having, and the other things beyond just the infrastructure, having bus stops that are welcoming and comfortable and actually are protected from the sun, all these things that just make it a little bit easier. Wayfinding, right? I mean, every time I travel and I want to use transit, I get confused. I know it's not just me. And just being having really clear signage. I mean, of course, we use our phones a lot now, which is another thing we can talk about, but there's nothing like just a sign that is like so clear about like where you need to go and where you're going that makes a difference. So I found that it had to be multiple things that made it a real choice. I mean, I would argue that if there's not, you could have the protected bike lanes for 80% of your journey, and then you have some really dangerous intersections, right? And that's it. It's like most people are going to say, no way, I'm not going to risk myself on that one block or those 2 blocks. I've got to stay in my car.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's part of the physical, but you mentioned it's not just physical context. There's psychosocial context as well. Can you share some of what came up there?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the most exciting part of the research, and it's still what sticks with me so much. And it has many levels to it. But I think back in my research, then I talked a lot about it as like sociocultural conditions. And so a lot of it starts with, that kind of go as close to the person as you can. And you think about the social connections that can support sustainable transportation behavior is what we're talking about. And so literally the sense of a community, right? And people, and I remember vividly some interviews about people talking about their community on the train where they saw the same people every day. Some they were, would actually have conversations with, some they just recognized and, smiled at. And it was very, something that just came from them. I wasn't asking them about this. This happens, of course, in cities where there's a lot of people biking. There's a real sense of you're part of the pack. You're going or flowing around together. So there's that direct community. But then there's things that are kind of behind the scenes that I think play just as important a role, which is like social support, right? Yeah. So you have, especially if you're in transition from you're trying to be less car dependent, you're trying other modes. Like, what do? If you get a flat tire, the weather's going to be inclement at times. How do you have the right gear so it's not like this huge hassle or awful experience that you have? And I mentioned already, like just support. Signage can help you with transit, but nothing can help you more than a person who knows that transit well and can just tell you exactly where to go or how to do it. And so there's that social support, there's that community. And then another aspect of it is really social influence. And we all have a sense of wanting to be part of it's in our DNA to be part of a group. And if everybody around us is not interested in these other modes, it's going to be hard. And then I even found that when people maybe had some friends who biked or took transit on a regular basis, they still may not, because they viewed their situation as distinct from them. Like they don't live exactly where I am. They don't go to work exactly where I am. So I found like a really powerful couple examples where people were in an office and they kind of reached a tipping point of enough people using different car modes. And so there was this energy around that, but it was also like they could really relate to each other. They were coming from kind of similar places. Yeah. And so it just kind of becomes this tipping point of a very reinforcing social cycle. I mean, the last thing I'll say is connection to nature came out in this quite a bit. Yeah. People talking about one commuter, the coyote in Golden Gate Park that she saw biking from her home to the school where she works. And then people talking about like park-like settings and just kind of that connection with some trees along the way. Like we had these meaningful experiences that kind of reinforced them continuing to use those nodes.
Fascinating. I guess, for lack of a better term, the peer pressure component of the psychosocial, the context where there's others who are exploring or utilizing different behaviors to meet their needs, providing support in a psychological sense that like, okay, there's others who are part of this group or included because that's their behaviors. Not a dissertation and not any qualitative studies in a doctoral program, but anecdotally, I see the same thing in food around behavior. I had naive assumptions at one point in my life that it was awareness, okay, like that there's healthier options to eat food, and that if people knew about the options, then that would be enough. And I was quickly disabused of that notion. Awareness was, in many cases, very much there. Then it was access. I'm like, okay, well, physical, the food's got to be there. There's clearly major problems. And these are still very big problems, food apartheid, food deserts, and so forth, where there's less available to whole foods and fresh nutrition and so forth. But even in places where I then saw access be created, there were other challenges. And then I thought, well, maybe it's cookery and access to cookery equipment and so forth. So it's like skill knowledge or something like that. And then turned out that maybe there are some barriers there. It's part of the story, but definitely not a bigger part of the story than what I did learn. This is all from anecdotal stuff, not a qualitative study or analysis, but in some cases it was cultural, where the other families that we hang out with, they all eat these types of foods and eat here. If I start eating other foods, then I'm no longer included in that group. And there's a pressure that was exerted subtly but powerfully to maintain certain habits. And obviously there's other contextual things, which I'm sure show up in transportation, about the pressures of wage slavery conditions or work. When you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you probably neither have time to cook nor to take the extra 20 minutes for the bus, bike, or whatever the other transportation has, because of the economic pressures to mediate one's needs through cash and income through wages. So hearing you share about your much more rigorous, not anecdotal, like qualitative analysis, that's affirming for me because it just resonates in other behavior aspects of life. I think that's probably what I'm seeing in your book is like, there's lots of behaviors that could change, but you point to like this context that there's a systemic approach. So in Connected to Place, you kind of identify systems change levers, shifting power, transforming land use itself, resetting culture, and then leveraging other systems. I'm wondering if you could just go through those 4 levers and maybe even how they work together as a foil against or a counter to corporate capitalism's vice grip on communities.
Yeah. Great. And I appreciate what you said about your experience and thoughts around the food system and food choices. And absolutely, you just kind of made a thread in my career where in my dissertation, I started to talk about, well, maybe this theory that's been developed for my studies could apply to food, could apply to energy choices, could apply to consumer goods and other aspects of our life. And that's what I've been playing with ever since. The levers you just mentioned are how do we then change this context that really dictates our choices more than we often recognize. And I appreciate how you also brought out that there's the undercurrent culturally of speed and efficiency that is so dominant in convenience. And some of it's, incredibly unjust, like you pointed out, with people who have to work so much. And some of it is just the buzz of capitalism. Like you don't have time to wait that extra 3 minutes. And it can literally be that little of time. We don't have time to prepare food in a way that might be better for us and the environment and so forth. And so I think we really have to, make all these things as explicit as possible and with empathy, right? And the empathy part of it really is that, again, our choices are so constrained by existing systems. And as you pointed out in your question, corporate capitalism is really this dominant hold, and you can go back hundreds of years of history with colonialism and all sorts of disproportionate power over systems. But it's really in the last, 50 so years where corporations and economic globalization have just taken off and become so dominant in our lives, right? They just appear, and it says the systems, but my focus, as we've kind of been talking about, is not just changing systems for certain goals, but that's a big part of it, but specifically through changing how we live. Like I'm kind of talking about, and so it's just important to center it first there, that there's this crisis of disconnectedness, and we can explore that more. But so if we can kind of reorient our lives around the places where we live, and bring more in connection with our communities, nature's local economies, I feel like we're getting more at the root of the change. But corporate capitalism is pushing us constantly away from our places. And the levers, kind of the theory I've developed over time from both projects and research about what exactly explains that whole. And there are like certain corporate capitalist forces that are particularly strong, which are around like digital society, car dependency, which we've been talking about, consumerism, and then just like this reliance on the global economy. But then you've got the essentially power, land use, culture, and silos kind of keeping these systems in place and all the problems that they've created. So the political and market power is something we talk about, I think, a lot in our society. It's just so clear. That's why we have things, big tech, big auto, big ag, all of those. We know that a lot of these different systems, economic systems largely, have become dominated by just a few corporations in a lot of cases. And just, Amazon is one that kind of exemplifies that, where just like every angle of the political system in terms of getting subsidies and tax breaks and then, just utilizing market power to like extract 30% from everybody who sells on Amazon, right? It's just like, they're just like a very clear representation of how powerful even one corporation can be. Then the power, it's kind of separate, but also translates into the culture and the land use. And so, So the cultural narrative, right? The ubiquitous advertising and marketing, like you talked earlier about being in.
4,000 ads a day, the average American is exposed to. The ubiquity of the messaging, which then has to affect our psyche and our motivations and disconnects people from their needs, the manufactured artificial demand to purchase crap or whatever, something in the spirit of supporting a transaction. It requires either a tremendous amount of privilege and positionality or courage and effort to try and disconnect from the exposure to the advertising onslaught. And it's not, just for color for listeners. I know listeners know this, but like, it's not just advertising. It's that the advertising industry has literally spent collectively billions or tens or hundreds of billions of dollars over time studying psychometrics and how we react to different images and messages, such that advertisers are attuned to know us as good or better than we know ourselves in some cases. So it's an asymmetric kind of situation for culture, for any individual within culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's getting ever so sophisticated with AI tools and digital advertising. And you're right. Knowing us better than we know ourselves, these immense digital profiles that each one of us has if you spent much time online. And so, the power, it just like layers upon it with these advanced technologies. But the ultimate effect, right, is the dominance is like, okay, what does it mean to be cool and normal in the society? It associates with the corporate products in a lot of cases. What is the good life? What is, what's the aspiration? And I think it also kind of keeps playing into so many things that are sold to us. And you mentioned the Paul Hawken idea of like manufacturing needs that are actually wants. And just that, we need this to be like to increase in convenience in our lives or be more productive. It's all about constantly being more productive. And like that's the value that's being perpetuated. And we feel ever so pressed for time. So yes, these products become attracted to us because we're swimming in that water that says time is always so precious. And like the brand attachment, right? Like we know corporate logos way more than we know like native plants or other aspects of our local community now. It's just unfortunately where we are. The final part, like just the land, I'll just quickly say like land use, the land, we can't deny like so much influence over, it's so clear with autos, and just the incredible car dependent infrastructure that's been built. And then even like the sprawl kind of plays into not only car dependency, but like this, all the sprawl of housing, but it's really a product of big real estate developers. Like it's the most profitable way to build houses. If you can just build a whole bunch of houses in one place and replicate that, that's much more profitable. And so that, I think that explains.
Land is undoubtedly the largest asset of the business as usual economy. And it's not that we get to create more land. Almost all the land in the economy was stolen or captured through some kind of imperial or colonial kind of activity for a large part anyway. In fact, we're losing land to the ocean now every year for the rest of our lives in our global warming context. So it becomes more and more scarce. And it dominates the economy, both in terms of personal endearment. But if you look at the major forces in the economy of banking, most of the currency banking created to put into the economy came in the form of private property kind of lending. So there's still this connection. So if banks are the edifice of corporate capitalism and its grip, the currency that they develop, it comes from some relationship to land use. And so, like you said, there's a lot of perverse incentives around how land has been allocated, not to mention the racial and segregation oriented undertones to zoning and,
Absolutely.
So there's a layer of policy on top of use rights that has a very perverse history.
Yes. Yeah. And definitely. And then right, all of those things. And right, the people in power benefiting from the land use, and a lot of corporate entities benefiting mostly from it. 40% of our land in the country is, going back to what we talked about with food, is raising livestock. And that's all, big ag and just the whole system around that. So I appreciate we diving into like the problem. And I didn't actually get to, really answering your question about what are the systems change levers, but I think it's really important to what the system change levers are flipping the corporate capitalist playbook. Right. So how do we, and I like Buckminster Fuller's guidance, which I put in my book, is just, it helps position this where the idea of fighting like corporate domination and power seems really daunting. And his word is like, don't focus so much your energy on fighting the existing reality, just build another model that we can gravitate towards. So I put a lot of my energy into that. So it's shifting power to community-driven and local and regional enterprise and building collective power among groups. That's how we counter this larger power, is the more people we can bring together around something. And just, transforming land use, we just touched on that, but anything from urban agriculture to community solar and microgrids, there's so many other ways we can use our land to support more place-based economies. Resetting.
So let's touch on this a little bit. So transforming land use, you would say, as examples would be integrating mixed use. So where land use has been segregated to housing over here and industry over there and energy generation over there and food production over there, finding more ways to actually integrate those uses so that we can stack functions, reduce waste, and provide more proximity. Do you want to highlight any case studies or examples of land use as a lever, or say anything more about what transforming land use looks like?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple of examples we could talk about there. And you definitely, I think the two pieces that I play with, and I'll give you an example of each, is the mixed use aspect, the 15-minute community, the 15-minute city, but also like the regional piece of it too. That can be, the whole premise being, how can we take care of all of our needs within our region, within our localities, as opposed to having to rely on extraction of cheap nature and labor from around the world. And so, yes, Paris is a great example of changing kind of multiple systems, but really manifested itself on change on the streets. So I do spend a lot of my time thinking about street change and working on street change, because to me, it brings together multiple systems, and Paris kind of shows that, where it is, yes, obviously transportation, how we get around, but it's also streets are a huge part of our land in most of our cities. It can be considered a community space. It can be a space for nature, urban nature, and it's certainly a way to access and support local business and local enterprise.
Some cities, 20 to 30% is right of ways, the land use, something like that.
Yeah, San Francisco's 25%.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Streets, sidewalks, so much potential land there that could be used in different ways. And I hear about this, but I think someone did an analysis here. It's like 95% of streets is cars. I mean, it's just no question about it. Right? Yeah. So Paris the city center is now 3 times as many cyclists as cars, which is just kind of like phenomenal. And so you've got all the co-benefits, right? Less car traffic, less crashes, better air and water quality. And the levers were much at play here. And it's more than the cyclist. I'll get to that. But that's one manifestation of it. But the power, built up over time. This all happened within a decade, a whole bunch of change. And advocates coming together. Mayor Anne Hidalgo has become she was able to get support around this and able to take it really far. And so the land use change is, 800 new miles of bike lanes, a really big expansion of pedestrian spaces, wider sidewalks, 50,000 car parking spots removed, and a lot of car lanes. And then the addition of like 100 open streets, which are, open streets is intentional word there, open to everything but cars, and prioritizing it a lot near schools. I could go on and on about that example because Paris voters voted again last year to greatly expand this to 500 more open streets and more parking removal to make it happen. So you have this buildup of power, and then it was this really bold move to make land use, and the benefits started to come. But it was also anchored in the fact that there was a very conscious effort to build a 15-minute city with lots of local business, with local food. They've done an incredible job with like rooftop farms and so forth. And to really build a lot of nature into this, where like a third of every street change is supposed to be not cement, but plantings. And so just bringing more people out into an environment that they appreciate. And once they've experienced it, they want more of it. I'm not going to say there wasn't any political pushback. There was plenty. And there's some good things that have happened in San Francisco along those lines too, that we had more time we would talk about. But streets is a great way to bring multiple systems together and talk more about that. I can give you a regional example if you want as well.
Well, no. So I think I'm getting the gist of like the land use change as a lever. And so I heard that there's the kind of the mixed use and integration, the 15-minute community, the 15-minute city, et cetera, where there's more proximity to one's needs, which enables some of the behavior change, especially around transportation, but also public health and so many other aspects of our lives, food system, et cetera, and different behaviors. And then the regional land use change of like locally self-reliant bioregions, or the idea that instead of importing 95% plus of the goods from where there's exploitation of labor or land somewhere else outside of the region, the idea of creating more bioregional resiliency, still interdependent on each other regionally, but just we have so far to go to relocalize economies in general that's another, and a lot of that is dictated by land use choices. But you've mentioned a couple of times in the example of Paris how shifting power relates to land use changes. And so shifting power is one of the levers. I'm wondering if you could just talk more about how shifting power happens and what it looks like as a lever.
Sure. And a lot of it is building collective power. And so hopefully in a more democratic society, and you're able to elect leaders who really are going to go on that vision. And then you get some politically courageous ones who will go far. So there's a lot of advocates kind of working on that from different spaces. It wasn't just the bike folks in Paris. It was also like the local food, some of the local business. And to give you a little bit more flavor of that, I can take you to like another example that I know so well, which is here in San Francisco, where we have actually had a lot of street transformation, where we have JFK Promenade, Sunset Dunes, which are car-free, mile and a half in one case, 2 miles in the other, and a whole bunch of slow streets. And what I've kind of observed and been a part of is like how there is like the transportation groups, and then there's like some local neighborhood groups, and then there's maybe like senior disability advocates, youth recreation folks, park and rec. Like there's these coalitions that are built that are saying like there's multiple benefits to this. And then again, you find, leaders who are willing to take a stand on this. One leader, a supervisor who took a stand on one of these streets, lost his job. And I have examples in my book of that happening multiple times. And it's unfortunate, but I'm very inspired and admiration of leaders who are willing to go to that direction. They did enough to get elected, and they may have taken things further than some people wanted, but ultimately we end up with something like the kind of catalytic change that we need. That's just one way that it can happen. And I kind of glossed over the cultural components of it, but that played a huge role in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, that's one of the other levers. So what I'm hearing about shifting power is that coalition building, finding diverse groups with diverse interests who see the synergistic kind of benefit of a change, say in land use, as mutually beneficial. There's coalition building, which can, in the context of electoral politics, maybe that results in better supervisors, maybe who are more courageous, maybe they even overextend their mandate in some cases. But one of the other levers, of course, that we're going through here is this resetting culture. So can you just say more about what that looks like? Is that an effect of the shifting power in the land use, or is that commensurate with, or can you just tell us more about that lever?
Yeah, no, it's great. They're so synergistic. You could just draw all sorts of arrows between power, land use, and culture. But sometimes there's a linear fashion to it. And I've had to break my own ways of thinking. I was kind of raised a linear thinker, and I've really had to change the way I think about things. So culture shows up in all these different ways. In Paris, one way it showed up was related to land use, but it is the fact that there was an investment in abundant bike share stations and bike parking. And so the cultural piece of that was really strong because it said to residents and visitors, we really value biking here. Like you can hardly walk a few blocks without seeing this. Like this is a place for you to bike. And it helped drive it home. In San Francisco, it's very unlikely any of these changes would have happened. And there's also these 18 slow streets, which is another kind of active transportation, community-focused approach to streets. All of these things happened in 2 years. But what precipitated that was the pandemic. And so people, JFK Promenade in particular, there have been people fighting for years, decades, to try to not have cars on that street in the middle of a park. And it was finally the fact that in the pandemic, it was declared a space where people could safely get outside, and people it got activated with all these different uses from art, music, kids learning to ride bikes, beer garden, well, eventually beer garden, I guess that was post-pandemic. And so that experience led to a lot of political support. So in that case, you say like politics is downstream of culture. Like that cultural wave just kind of went right to the ballot box and said 63% of San Franciscans said, absolutely, let's do this. And it's a very well utilized space.
Great. So it's not necessarily cause and effect, but there's all these intersections. And then leveraging other systems. So in shifting power, you talked about coalition building, but can you say more about leveraging other systems as a lever itself?
Yeah, definitely. So it blends in with power in a lot of ways, but it also can be a very explicit way of thinking about change more holistically. And it also can help explain when things kind of fall apart, right? And so because if it's just like one system trying to change, if we're just trying to build like a great community space, but it takes away people's transportation choices because you take away like a road to drive on, but there's no other alternative or not really good alternatives, or there's not really much attention paid to local business, which is another system, and that's kind of the challenge that's happening in Sunset Dunes, where it's still kind of on the brink. That if we can't make Sunset Dunes is an incredible 2-mile longest pedestrianization project in California along the ocean, a former 4-lane road. And it is a cherished community and nature space. But the local business system really has to benefit from that to be supportive. And there are some good signs there. But also people who are now upset about, it's been shown through studies like 3 to 4 minutes longer to get somewhere. There need to be really viable alternatives that at least some people will go to so that the traffic doesn't become such a problem. And so that's what I mean, leveraging multiple systems. It can't just happen in like a vacuum. And then like really, the regional systems, regional energy, there's the sheds, energy shed is one. And building out, land is precious. And so another way of leveraging multiple systems, maybe on a much more practical level, is how can you build local wind, solar, other types of generation with batteries and so forth, but also support local agriculture. And so there's this movement with ag wind and ag solar and it helps farmers with income and just trying to find ways to merge systems for larger change that benefits people economically. I mean, this has got to come down to giving people good jobs and helping with affordability, and leveraging systems can help do that.
Great examples. So you're a consultant, and an author, and you've facilitated kind of place-based collaboratives. In some of that work in the book, you note that organizational egos and, quote, collaboration fatigue can get in the way of systemic change. How can communities utilize strategic collaboration to build the collective power necessary to overcome status quo resistance? I'm sure there's diverse forms of resistance, but what does that bring up for you from what you've seen or witnessed that you think is promising and interesting for strategic collaboration?
Sure, great. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I definitely really enjoy working with the organizations and helping them try to find a common ground. And ultimately, yes, it is about overcoming status resistance. But in order to do that, have to be effective in terms of a collaboration that can move the needle on power, that can kind of help shift culture and then can kind of push on those land use changes. Working with, government's going to be a key part of that too. But I found over time, having worked with many collaboratives at different phases, that striking, it's a little bit of an art, right? I'm not, there's a lot of people who it's practiced with others. I'm not saying like I'm the only one who brings this to the table as a facilitator. It's always a dance with a lot of leaders. But it's definitely, it's balancing relationship building with a vision that really brings people together. And then the third part is tangible progress. So I find when those three things are at play, when there's like relationships of trust and value, and there's these great simple ways to actually measure that with network science around what creates trust and value among organizations, and they feel a much stronger commitment in that. And it's always a challenge. I mean, I've definitely seen things unravel. I've seen things become better, but it's something you really have to pay attention to, because without that, all the best plans in the world don't go anywhere, as you know. And then the vision is just something that, and we talked about like multiple systems and bringing people together, is trying to find that vision that whoever are the stakeholders, and hopefully it's stakeholders that really represent the community or city or whatever entity is trying to be served, that they are inspired by this vision. Like it's something like they'll think about pretty much every day. Like it connects to what their organization or group is doing. So there's that. But it also will kind of bring other people to the table. It's going to help build a larger coalition. I spent a lot of time thinking through that with folks. And then we can do all of that. We can build relationships, have the vision, but if we don't find ways to like actualize it in maybe some land use changes or policy changes that shift power, whatever it is, and start to build some steps, people are going to bail out pretty quickly. That's the collaboration fatigue, is like, okay, we spent this time talking together. And of course, there's some real unjust parts to that too. There's too many communities that have been brought to the table to provide input, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And I've come across that multiple times where there's a lot of resistance, understandable, because people have not been listened to. And so that's kind of the dance of collaboration. And I think we just need it so much. We cannot possibly address these problems without coming together in strategic ways.
There's so much there. That all makes a lot of sense, and from your lived experience. And you didn't make it out to be easy. Each of those pieces has their challenges. The trust building, any party that might be subjected to perverse incentives or some type of corporate capture influence from some special interest involved in a collaboration can hijack trust building very easily, maybe on purpose, maybe not. Same with collective visioning. Is in many cases, we can be really thoughtful and collaborative in forming a pluralistic kind of vision that works for everybody, except it oftentimes would not work for the hyper self-endearment kind of corporate business as usual extractive model, which relies on exploitation of or externalizing harm to society or nature or both. And so to the extent that the vision is crafted in collaboration with corporations or people subjected to corporate influence, that's going to be really challenging to find a cohesive vision. And then that third part of taking things into action and creating proof of concepts or things that are tangible, progress, traction, building momentum, overcoming the fatigue. That seems like a very practical guidance of like how to get these things going, is if you can get some of the first two of trust and a collective vision that's really inspiring and connected, but actually creating an example, pointing to it, celebrating it, using that as a feedstock for the motivation to continue. Yeah. That makes sense to me. Yeah, difficult stuff, but you're not making it out to be easy, but you are saying that there's a pattern here.
There's definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate how you pointed out organizational egos before and how you just talked about kind of the corporate capitalist culture around this. And I think it trickles down to nonprofits. Nonprofits are feeling like I've got to protect what I'm doing and my funding streams. And we have to kind of crack that. And I see ways that we're doing that, but funders have to come to the table and say, I really want to fund collaboration. I don't want to fund organizations just doing their own thing. And we've got a long ways to go on that, but there are some promising developments with some foundations.
Do you want to tell listeners what you're excited about right now? What's next for you? Things that you're tracking?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, I think broad excitement, just a few things, is definitely this growing recognition about how problematic our systems are. I feel like it's just kind of coming into the mainstream, it's less in the margins. And it's sad that that's our reality, but there's like some energy to start working on these things. More and more folks, and particularly, I want to single out one age group, but Gen Z and kind of the digital native group. It just, there's like groups emerging that are saying like no to social media and resisting AI. We didn't even really talk about that as much or so much to talk about, as you said, but that is a big form of disconnectedness. All the time we spend on our screens and all the problems of social media. And just, choosing not to own cars. So I feel like there's like this cultural energy that's starting to form there. It's not, by any means there, but it's emerging. And then finally, what excites me is this increased focus on nature and community connection. I attended SF Climate Week for the first time because in the past I've looked at it and it's all technology solutions. And there was actually 4 events when I was here for a couple of days on urban nature and community spaces, and there were awesome events, and that got me pretty energized. So those things are energizing me, and I'm kind of taking that into what I'm working on. I'm doing a lot of talks and workshops on this place-based systems change. There's the levers we talked about. There's also the catalyst, which is another part of my framework, and working with, particularly at universities. I did a workshop recently with a city and regional planning group, and I'm just feeling really inspired by the interest in the systems change framework and how students who are training for these kind of careers are applying it. And I'm kicking. I work a lot on safe routes to school, which is another topic, and I found it to be a very powerful merger of the education and transportation systems. And I help build with a bunch of other people partnerships between cities and schools. And so I feel like the safe routes to school is one of those catalyst out there that is underutilized, and it could lead to a lot of great change, particularly just around active and affordable ways of living too, and helping enhance kids' education. And then kind of broadly speaking, I work on different projects and like I mentioned, different talks, but I am kind of gravitating towards folks who are interested in kind of a regenerative Bay Area, which is around the idea we talked about with food sheds, regional food, energy, consumer goods, other things that would kind of connect our economy across the region. And then also just the streets piece that I'd mentioned. I worked with a lot of different groups, and the idea of kind of a regenerative streets network here in San Francisco that would be nature rich, vibrant for local business, and also helpful to get around without a car is building steam among a bunch of different groups. There's not a lack of initiatives or organizations or people thinking about this, but my excitement and my interest is just to help try to bring and connect the dots.
Yeah, thanks for doing that connective tissue work. One thing I like about your perspective is that there's a both and this to it, or an integrated kind of approach. At Lift Economy, we have one of our programs called Next Economy Living, with the hypothesis of Next Economy Living is that whereas one kind of rhetorical argument is that like it's the system needs to change and the system is what confines our behavior. There is another kind of argument, which is pretty weak, that says, no, you have to change your behavior first and this kind of thing. And even what we found out that the eco footprint calculator or whatever was developed by the energy industry, this kind of thing, the personal responsibility narrative, right? And clearly it's a both and, right? That there is personal behavior change, that cultivating our awareness and interest and practices in connection with others, in connection to our place, there are things that we can do. It's again, probably heavily influenced by our privilege, positionality, time affluence. There's a lot of conditions that are systemic that will affect our personal agency for behavior change. And of course, there's systemic work to do. But what I see in your book and your thinking and research is that we can maybe work on these things at the same time, rather than just one or the other. Like you said, it's not all linear. There's a non-linearity to change. And it's important to remember both sides of the equation. And it's very optimistic. There's things that can happen. There are levers of change. There are catalysts, areas where there's having a safe route to school is generally something people can agree on. And we can maybe leverage that for larger change with lots of side effects. And maybe that's what builds momentum for connecting to other systems, addressing other levers. So I love how you're thinking about all this and the work you're doing in connecting these efforts together. Is there anything that listeners can do that you would request any support or help, or how can they find out more about the book and what you're up to?
Yeah, great. And I just want to really quickly affirm I love that there's a next economy living aspect. And I love how you captured the both and systems and personal change. Personal change is the last chapter in my book. And it is the idea that if we want systems to change, we need to be rowing in the same direction. And personal change is actually a catalyst for systems change. But then there's three others that are much less reliant on individuals, but those all kind of clicking in. And so, yeah, I am working on all those different catalysts from collaboration to government to education and personally. And so as far as reaching me, as you mentioned, the book that I got out last year, which has been great to talk about, and appreciate everybody who's purchased a copy. And there's book club starting. So if you go to my website, connectedtoplace.com, easy to find. You'll see information on my book. There's a discount code from Cornell University Press, the publisher, that you can use. And I purposely put that out to everybody because if you use that code, even with a little bit of a shipping cost from the publisher, it's going to cost you less than it does getting it from Amazon. And I really encourage folks to go that route and wait a few days for the book to arrive. Of course, you can buy it. A lot of folks will buy the digital version and you'll get it right away, but you can also do through that. But like I mentioned, there's a book club guide, and I helped with one book club get that started, and it's really fun to have that process underway. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, I'm getting back into a monthly blog post. I just wrote one on bikeable places for connection and intelligence, and I just put out there, and I put out a monthly, newsletter with a blog. If you're interested, you can sign up there. Definitely reach out if you're in the Bay Area or beyond. I'm always interested in just hearing about what people are working on and open to having a conversation to share our thinking and approaches, and certainly anything related to regenerating nature, communities, and local economies, I want to support. And then the reality of social media piece, I am definitely going through digital downsizing. I never was too expansive that way, but the only place you'll really find me is LinkedIn. And so if that's something you use, please connect there. I'm somewhat active there, but my philosophy for that is get in and get out as quickly as I can, and let's stay connected in the real world.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put links to the appropriate places in the show notes. And I really thank you, Matt, for the work you're doing. And thanks for being on the show. And thanks for authoring this wonderful book. And I hope people who are listening want to get in touch and support what you're doing or create initiatives in their own communities. And I think a book club is a great action that people can start and read together and have fruitful conversations about what's next.
Oh, well, great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciated talking with you about this and all the great work you're doing at Lift Economy as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matt. We'll be in touch.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lift Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you haven't gathered from our podcast already, we're really passionate about helping to build a future that works for all of us. If you share that passion and are looking to deepen your practice, we want to share a few ways to connect and learn directly with the Lift Economy team. You've likely heard of the Next Economy MBA, which we started almost 10 years ago and have trained over 800 alumni through the fundamentals of business design from a regenerative and just perspective. New this year, our Next Economy Fund will embody our values of democratically allocating resources to Next Economy entrepreneurs that are part of our alumni network. We've also launched 2 trainings that came directly out of our MBA community's desire for more in-depth skill building around 2 key topics: organizational leadership and personal life design. Next Economy Leadership is a workshop series designed to help culture leaders at purpose-driven organizations move towards full embodiment of their values. And Next Economy Living is a 6-month training designed to help everyday citizens and consumers take actionable next steps to transform their local communities to align with a future that works for all of us. You can hear about all of these offerings and other ways we're supporting the Next Economy movement at lifteconomy.com/next steps. We deeply appreciate you being a listener of our show, especially in a cultural moment when attention and community are hard to come by. We're amazed by the community of folks we get to learn alongside through these offerings and hope you'll consider joining us.